There are stories that are simply told, and there are stories that carry the weight of destiny, stories that remind us that no encounter in life is by accident. The boy at my gate is one such story. This story is not just about a teacher and a boy. It is about the unseen hand that guides us, the quiet test of compassion that life places in our path, and the astonishing rewards that follow when we choose kindness even in our own hardship. Set between the bustling streets of Ibadan and the restless energy of Lagos, this tale explores sacrifice, hope, and divine timing. It reminds us that we are all gatekeepers, sometimes to another person's future, sometimes to our own. As you journey through the story, you will walk with a young teacher through seasons of lack, watch a boy rise from poverty to greatness, and witness how a single act of generosity can transform generations. This is more than a Yoruba tale. It is a Nigerian story. An African story. A universal story. It is a call to look beyond ourselves and invest in the seeds life places in our hands. May this book inspire you to open your own gate, because you never know which knock might be carrying the key to your destiny. No encounter is by accident. Ekei Solarera. The city of Ibadan is like no other. From the top of Maple Hill, one can see the rusty roof stretching as far as the eye can go, glistening in the dying light of the evening sun. That evening, the air was heavy with dust and smoke from countless cooking fires. Somewhere, a hawker's bell rang, and the call of "Eva Agoin" bread floated down the street. The sound of distant laughter from children playing ten-ten mingled with the blaring horns of more youths struggling to gather their last passengers. I was exhausted. My wrapper clung to me from the heat of the day, and chalk dust had found its way into the creases of my palms. The students had been restless. Some were preparing for WAEC, others were daydreaming about football. I had spent the day correcting compositions about how I spent my last holiday, red pen bleeding over their poor spelling. My throat ached from scolding. I had eaten only a small piece of bread since morning, saving what was left of my money for the weekend market. As I approached my house, a small two-room apartment tucked behind a compound wall painted in peeling yellow, I noticed someone standing at my gate. At first, I thought it was one of the market women coming to gossip, or perhaps my landlady's daughter coming to ask for chalk. But as I drew nearer, I saw a boy, tall, thin, almost skeletal. His shirt had lost its whiteness long ago. Now it was a pale gray, torn near the sleeve. His shorts were frayed at the hem. His sandals were nearly broken, one strap tied together with a piece of raffia rope. Sweat and dust made his face look older than his years. He bowed slightly, the way well-trained Yoruba boys do. "Auntie, Ijo, please more," he said, his voice low but urgent. "I heard you help students. Tomorrow is the deadline for WAEC registration. My mother is sick. My father is gone. If I miss this exam, my future is gone." His voice cracked on the last sentence. He clutched a torn exercise book to his chest as though it were a shield. His eyes, though tired, held dignity, not the look of someone merely begging, but of someone fighting for life. I stared at him for a long moment, my hand still resting on my gate. I had never seen him before. He was not one of my students. In this city, where people often fake stories to get money, I should have been suspicious. But something about his eyes disarmed me. There was no trickery there. Only desperation. "How much is the form?" I asked finally. "Nigerian naira 19,500. His voice was barely above a whisper, as though ashamed to mention such a sum. I froze. In my mind, I saw the balance on my phone, 21,000 Nigerian nairas. I thought of my landlord, who would soon come knocking for rent. I thought of the beans and gari I had left in my kitchen, barely enough to last 3 days. The sensible thing was to shake my head and tell him to try elsewhere. But somewhere deep in my spirit, another voice spoke. "Imo iwarawara, aya enboa. Do not hesitate, good fortune is coming." I sighed, unlocked the gate, and motioned him inside so I could sit down. He stood just outside the doorway, still clutching his exercise book as if afraid I might send him away. I asked his name. Eo, he replied. Eo Oledimeji. I brought out my small phone, my hands shaking slightly as I opened my bank app. I stared at the balance again. Giving this boy money would almost wipe me out. But I remembered my own WAEC years, how my parents had sold 2 goats to pay for my exam fees. What if no one had helped them? What would I have become? Without another word, I made the transfer. The alert came in seconds. Eo's eyes widened. His knees gave way and he dropped to the dusty ground, bowing low. Imo. God bless you. You have saved my life, he said, his voice breaking. He stood up and backed away slowly, as if afraid to turn his back too quickly on such a miracle. Then he clutched the book to his chest and walked down the road, each step quicker than the last until he disappeared around the corner. I stood there for a while, still holding my phone, the evening breeze brushing against my face. I felt strangely light, as though a weight had been lifted from me, even though my bank account was now almost empty. That night, as I sat on my thin mattress under the dim glow of my kerosene lantern, I thought of the boy again. Would he pass? Would he even sit for the exam? Or had I just thrown away my last savings on a stranger? I shook off the doubt and whispered a prayer. Oliwa, Jo, Jeki Epinomidi Ebuken. Lord, please let this decision become a blessing. When I woke the next morning, I half expected him to be back, maybe asking for transport fare or more money. But the street was quiet. Days passed, and I never saw him again. Life, however, had taken note. Destiny had just planted a seed, one that would take years to grow, but when it did, it would change my life forever. Season of sorrow. Iroyan Abanuch. The days after I paid for the boys' WAEC form stretched into weeks, and weeks became months. At first, there was a quiet satisfaction in my heart. I would smile whenever I thought about the look in his eyes as he walked away that evening. Hope had been lit in him, and I felt like I had done something good for the world. But soon, life began to tighten its grip on me like a python slowly coiling around its prey. The government school where I taught was always in crisis, no chalk, broken chairs, leaky roofs. Then came the notice, teacher downsizing. Names were listed, read aloud at the assembly ground, and just like that, I was unemployed. I remember standing under the almond tree as the headmaster's voice echoed through the cracked megaphone, reading the list. My heart sank when I heard my name. My students looked at me with wide eyes, some whispering in shock, others too busy chasing one another to notice that my world had just shattered. I went home numb that day. I locked my gate, sat on the mat in my one-room apartment, and stared at the wall. How would I survive? My rent was due soon, my mother's health was failing, and my savings were barely enough to last 2 months. For the first time in years, I felt the heavy weight of despair pressing on my chest. Then came the sickness. My mother, my rock and prayer warrior, fell ill. It started with mild fevers and coughs, but soon she couldn't get out of bed. I rushed her to the government hospital where patients spilled into the corridors, waiting for hours. The doctor said she needed tests, malaria, typhoid, maybe pneumonia. Each test cost money. Each drug cost money. I withdrew the last 10,000 Nigerian nairas in my account and spent it all within a week. My heart broke as I watched her lose weight, her once lively face now hollow. She would hold my hand at night and whisper between coughs. Omomi, mo iyago fonaya. Oloran mo saibukuan o. My child, do not run from doing good. God will reward you. I did not know it would be one of the last things she would ever say to me. One dawn, as the muezzin's call to prayer echoed faintly from the nearby mosque, my mother took her last breath. The room fell silent. I sat there, numb, until tears flooded my face. The neighbors came, women wailing, some helping me make arrangements. I buried her in our ancestral village, under the mango tree she had planted years ago. Returning to Ibadan after the burial felt unbearable. The house felt empty, her wrapper still hanging on the wall, her favorite stool by the corner untouched. I couldn't stay. The walls of the city felt too close, the memories too heavy. I sold my small gas cooker, my old fan, and packed my belongings into 2 wooden boxes. Ibadan had given me memories, but Lagos was where people went when they had nowhere else to turn. The day I boarded the bus to Lagos, I sat by the window as the vehicle rumbled along the expressway. The brown roofs of Ibadan stretched out behind me, getting smaller until they vanished from sight. Tears slipped down my cheeks. Where am I going? What will become of me? I asked silently, clutching my handbag like a lifeline. Lagos greeted me with its characteristic chaos. The downfall conductors shouting at the top of their voices, Odulegba Street. CMS. Enter with your change. The thick smell of roasted corn, puff, and exhaust fumes mixing in the air. My cousin, a tailor, welcomed me to her 1-room apartment in Mushin. She was kind, but the space was already cramped, her husband, 3 children, and now me. At night, I slept on a thin mattress on the floor, squeezed between 2 of her children. Life in Lagos was survival. Every morning, I woke before dawn, quickly bathed with a bucket of cold water, dressed carefully, and set out with my brown envelope full of CVs. I joined the human flood at Oshodi bus stop, sometimes standing in the scorching sun for hours before a downfall stopped. I would drop my CV in offices, banks, schools, even restaurants, and most times, no one called back. There were days when I could not afford transport fare. I would trek long distances from Yoba to Surale, my shoes coated with dust, sweat soaking my dress, just to deliver one more CV. Some offices turned me away at the gate. Some promised to call and never did. My cousin encouraged me, but I could see the strain in her face. Feeding an extra mouth was not easy. I learned to ration my hunger. Some days, I drank Gary with no sugar and went to bed early to silence the gnawing in my stomach. Other days, I skipped dinner so the children could eat more. But every night, as I lay on the floor, I would pray. Oliwa, moje iki mifo. Moje iki orimi ob. Lord, do not let my efforts be wasted. Do not let my destiny fall. Sometimes I would dream of my students back in Ibadan. I would see their faces, hear their chatter, and wake up crying, missing the life I once had. I miss the classroom, the chalk dust, even the noise. I miss my mother's gentle voice urging me to hold on. But Lagos has a way of teaching patience. Slowly, I began to learn the rhythm of the city. I found cheaper bus routes, I started helping my cousin with her tailoring business, and I made friends with other job seekers. We would encourage one another, sharing information about open positions, praying together before interviews. One evening, after a particularly long day of rejections, I sat by the window of my cousin's room, staring at the flickering light bulb. My heart felt heavy, but somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered. Suru Enai Boba Iwa. Patience is the father of good character. I didn't know it then, but the storm was slowly clearing. My season of sorrow was not the end, it was only preparing me for the day destiny would come knocking again. Destiny returns. Epoda Ewai. The day the call came felt like a miracle. It was a humid evening, and I had just returned from another exhausting trip delivering CVs. My feet ached, and my clothes were damp from both sweat and the sudden drizzle that had caught me near Yoba. I sat on the mattress, rubbing my tired legs, when my phone buzzed. At first, I thought it was my cousin calling to ask me to buy bread on my way home. But when I picked up and heard the polite voice of a lady saying, "Good evening, Ma, this is from Global Tech Nigeria. You have been shortlisted for an interview for the position of administrative officer." My heart skipped a beat. When? I asked, my voice shaking. 3 days from today, at 9 a.m., Victoria Island office. I thanked her, wrote down the details, and ended the call. Then I screamed. My cousin came running, thinking something was wrong. When I told her, she danced around the room, shouting the praise God. Her children clapped too, though they didn't understand what had happened. For the next 3 days, I lived like someone preparing for battle. I washed and ironed my only good dress, a plain but decent gown. I polished my shoes until I could almost see my face in them. I rewrote my CV carefully, printed fresh copies, and arranged my credentials in a brown envelope. My cousin helped me plait my hair neatly and lent me her gold earrings to wear. Each night, I knelt down to pray. Oloron, Jo, Jeiki Ojo Yidi Ibiri Iron Ohotonten me. God, please let this day be the beginning of my new journey. On the morning of the interview, I woke before dawn. The air was still cool as I had my bath and dressed carefully. My cousin pressed my dress again to remove the smallest wrinkle. Then she held my hands and prayed, tears in her eyes. This is your day, she said softly. Go and return with good news. Getting to Victoria Island was a journey of its own. I left home before sunrise, boarded a danfo from Mushin to CMS, then squeezed into a kiki to get closer to the office. The traffic was already building near Eco Bridge, but I arrived with 30 minutes to spare. My heart was beating so loudly that I could almost hear it. The Global Tech building was massive, glass and steel shining under the morning sun. I had never entered a place so beautiful. The floors gleamed, the air smelled of expensive perfume and cool air conditioning. The receptionist smiled at me politely and asked me to sit in the waiting area. There were other applicants, all dressed smartly, some tapping nervously on their phones. I clasped my handbag tightly and whispered under my breath. Oloron, Jo, Mo Ikeo Messiah. God, please do not abandon me. Finally, my name was called. A young HR assistant led me to the interview room. The walls were white, the table long, and 3 people sat behind it with files in front of them. I greeted them respectfully and sat down, my palms sweating. The interview began, questions about my experience, my skills, what I could contribute to the company. I answered as best as I could, trying to sound confident though my voice trembled slightly. They nodded politely, writing things down. Then the HR assistant said, the final decision will come from our new regional director. He's young but brilliant. He just resumed last week. I nodded, my heart racing again. Then the door opened. He walked in. Tall. Well-dressed. Confident. He carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had fought hard to be where he was. But when his eyes met mine, he stopped mid-step. Something flashed across his face, shock, recognition, and then something softer. Auntie, he asked, his voice thick with surprise. I blinked, confused. Yes. Were you once a teacher in Ibadan? Government secondary school. My mouth fell open slightly. Yes, I said slowly, wondering how this man could know. His lips curved into a smile. His eyes glistened. You paid for my WAEC. For a moment, the room went silent. I stared at him, my mind racing back to that dusty evening years ago, the boy at my gate, the torn exercise book, the desperate plea. Could this man be that boy? You, I whispered, barely breathing. You are. Yes, Mo, he said, stepping closer. I am the boy you helped. You may not remember my name, but I never forgot you. My throat tightened, and tears stung my eyes. In that moment, I felt the weight of all my struggles lifting, the hunger, the rejections, the tears on the thin mattress in motion. It all made sense. Destiny had circled back to meet me. The panel looked at him in surprise, waiting for him to continue. He smiled at them and said, "Please, let's pause this interview. When the heart remembers. Idean Onimo." The interview room was suddenly charged with a strange silence, not the awkward kind, but one filled with something heavy, something holy. The man who had just walked in, the one they had introduced as the regional director, was no longer just a company executive to me. He was that boy. That dusty-faced teenager who had stood at my gate with trembling lips and hope clutched to his chest like a fragile thing. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I blinked them back, trying to remain composed. He pulled a chair and sat down slowly, his gaze still locked on me. The panelists shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another, not sure what was happening. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but carrying a quiet emotion that filled the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to the panel, "I must tell you something before we proceed." The older man in the panel, perhaps the head of HR, frowned slightly. "Director, should we step out?" He shook his head gently. "No. You should hear this." Then he turned back to me. "Do you remember that day, Mo? You probably had no reason to trust me. You didn't even know my name. But you gave me 19,500 naira, money I'm sure you could barely spare. You paid for my WAEC form." My mouth opened, but no words came out. All I could do was nod. He smiled sadly. That money became the key that unlocked my life. I passed my WAEC. I got a scholarship. I studied engineering and graduated with first-class honors. I worked hard, got another scholarship abroad. Every time I wanted to give up, I remembered that a stranger believed in me, so I had no excuse to fail. The panel was completely silent now. The woman among them looked at me, her eyes softening. The HR manager shifted in his seat. The air conditioning hummed quietly, the only sound apart from his voice. Then he did something that stunned me. He stood up. "This woman," he said, gesturing toward me, "is the reason I am standing here today. Without her, I would have been just another street boy in Ibadan with wasted potential. She gave me a future when she had nothing to gain." I could no longer hold back the tears. They flowed freely down my cheeks, hot and uncontrollable. I didn't care who saw. He walked toward me, then turned to the panel. "With all due respect, this interview is over. She is hired." The panelists exchanged glances, then nodded slowly. No one argued. It felt like even they understood this was not just a corporate decision, this was destiny sealing something that had started years ago. I rose to my feet shakily, clutching my handbag. My knees felt weak. "Thank you," I whispered, but my voice cracked. He shook his head. "No, Mo. Thank you. I have been waiting for this moment for years. I promised myself that if I ever found you, I would never let you lack again." He turned back to the panel. "Prepare her employment letter. Effective immediately. And not just the role she applied for, put her on the Community Development Board. She will help shape our youth outreach programs." The HR manager nodded, almost smiling. "Yes, Director." Then he turned back to me and said words I will never forget. "Anywhere I sit, you will sit. For life." It was too much. I pressed my palms together, bowed my head and said softly, "Oloran Oson. God never sleeps." When I left the building that day, clutching the offer letter they had prepared in haste, the Lagos sun felt different on my skin. The noise of Danfo conductors sounded like music. I had walked into that building just another unemployed woman fighting to survive, but I walked out with my destiny restored. That night, when I returned to Mushin, my cousin saw the letter in my hand and screamed. The neighbors came running, and soon our small compound was filled with people dancing, praying, or relating. Someone brought out a drum. I laughed until my belly hurt, tears mixing with joy. It was as though all my nights of hunger, my long treks under the sun, my whispered prayers on a thin mattress had been gathered by heaven and poured back on me in a single day. When I finally lay down to sleep that night, I remembered my mother's words on her sickbed. Omo mi, mo iyago fonaya. Oloron mo saibukuan o. My child, do not run from doing good. God will reward you. And I knew she was smiling in heaven. Fruit of kindness, Icona AY. The first day I resumed at Global Tech felt surreal. I stood before the giant glass building again, this time not as a nervous applicant but as an employee. The security man greeted me with a cheerful, "Good morning, Ma," and handed me a temporary staff tag. I almost laughed, Ma. Me? The same woman who had spent months begging for jobs and sleeping on a floor mattress. Inside, the office buzzed with quiet activity. People moved about confidently, dressed smartly, their shoes clicking on the polished floors. The HR assistant gave me a tour, the open workstations, the conference rooms, the cafeteria where the smell of freshly brewed coffee drifted through the air. I thought of my cousin's cramped kitchen in Mushin, where we boiled water on a single burner stove, and I nearly wept from gratitude. When I was introduced to the rest of the staff, they greeted me warmly, though I could sense their curiosity, who was this new hire the regional director had personally recommended. I took my seat at my small but comfortable desk, touched the computer gently, and whispered a prayer. Oloran, Ion. Ikimi Ayidada. God, thank you. Help me do this work well. Learning the ropes. The first few weeks were a whirlwind. I had to learn new software, understand company policies, and get used to working in a fast-paced environment. Sometimes I stayed late, taking notes and practicing until I understood everything. The director, my former boy at the gate, would check on me, smiling like a proud younger brother. One afternoon, after a particularly intense meeting, he asked me to join him in his office. His office was spacious, with a view of the Lagos Lagoon. He gestured for me to sit. "Auntie teacher," he said, he had started calling me that on my first day, "I want to do something. I want to create a scholarship fund in your name." I blinked in surprise. "In my name?" "Yes," he said firmly. "The same way you gave me a future, I want us to give other children the same chance. We will pay WAEC fees for students who cannot afford them. Not just one or two, as many as we can." Tears filled my eyes. I could only nod. That week, we began planning. We called it Auntie Teachers Fund. The company approved a budget, and soon we were working with schools in Oyo State to identify bright but needy students. The first time I traveled back to Ibadan on official duty to launch the program, I felt goosebumps. The event was held in a secondary school hall. Rows of students sat in their worn-out uniforms, some barefoot, all watching me with wide eyes. As I spoke to them about hope and education, I saw myself in their faces. I saw the boy at my gate again. My voice shook as I told them, "No matter where you are coming from, your present does not define your future. Someone believed in me, and I am here to believe in you." When we handed out the scholarship forms, the students screamed with joy, and some of them knelt to thank us. I went behind the hall and wept quietly. The transformation. Within a year, the fund had paid for hundreds of students' WAEC and NICO fees. Some of them began writing me letters, shy, heartfelt notes saying, "Auntie teacher, thank you for giving me a chance." Every time I read one, I would smile through tears. The boy who once came to my gate had become a bridge, and now, through him, I was helping to build many other bridges. My own life was changing too. I was earning a salary that allowed me to live with dignity. I moved out of my cousin's room into a small apartment of my own in Suralia. I bought a gas cooker, a bed with a real mattress, and even a small fridge. The first night I slept in my own space, I turned on the light and just stared around the room, whispering, Boba me. Thank you, my father." But perhaps the greatest transformation was internal. I had regained my confidence. The woman who once walked under the Lagos sun dropping CVs now stood before corporate boards, speaking about youth empowerment. I began mentoring young girls, teaching them to value education and never give up. A seat at the table. One day, the director called me to his office again. "There's a board meeting coming up," he said. "I want you to attend. You are not just staff, auntie teacher. You are part of this vision." That first board meeting felt intimidating. The room was full of powerful people, men in suits, women in designer dresses. But when I entered, the director smiled and gestured to the seat beside him. "Anywhere I sit, you will sit," he reminded me. When it was my turn to speak, I shared about the scholarship program, the impact on rural communities, and the letters from students. The board members applauded. One elderly man said, "Madam, you are not just an employee. You are a movement." I left that room feeling taller than ever. A life rebuilt. Months later, I traveled back to Ibadan again, this time for a different reason. I had bought a small piece of land near our old house. I built a simple bungalow where girls from nearby villages could stay safely while completing their secondary education. We called it Al-Iriti, House of Hope. Every weekend, I would sit with them under the mango tree and tell them stories. Stories of my mother. Stories of Ibadan. Stories of the day a boy stood at my gate. And every time, I ended with the same Yoruba proverb. Anfani reki ipe titi laisan. A good deed never goes unrewarded. The girls would nod, their faces glowing with hope. The legacy begins. Now, when I look back, I see that the 19,500 Nigerian nairas I once thought was a burden was actually a seed. It has grown into a tree, and that tree now provides shade for many. The boy I barely knew had returned to my life not just with a job offer but with an entire destiny. And so, every time the director calls me auntie teacher in front of the staff, and everyone smiles, I smile too, because I remember the gates, the dust, the trembling boy, and I know God was weaving a story bigger than my pain. Flashback, the boy's struggle, it in IBI. The company retreat was held at a quiet beach resort in Lekki. Palm trees lined the shore, swaying lazily in the breeze. The sound of waves kissing the sand was almost hypnotic. After the board meeting, we were encouraged to take time off to rest, reflect, and bond. That afternoon, he asked me to sit with him under an almond tree. He had carried this story in his heart for years, and now, he said, it was time I heard everything. He began slowly, like someone peeling layers off a painful memory. His father had died of typhoid when he was just 13. "I can still remember," he said, voice low, "the way they carried him out of the room that day. My mother screamed until her voice broke. They were left with nothing but a crumbling rented room in Beer and a few cooking pots." His mother began selling vegetables in the market, but her health started failing soon after. There were days they slept on empty stomachs, days they soaked gari without sugar and called it dinner. When my friends talked about going to school, I pretended not to care, he said, plucking a blade of grass between his fingers. But inside, I was dying. I wanted to write WAEC. I wanted a chance. He spoke about going from house to house, knocking on doors, begging for help. Some laughed, some ignored him, some told him to stop disturbing them. Each rejection felt like a stone added to his chest. "The day I came to your gate," he said, turning to me, "I had been turned away by 3 people already. My legs were weak. I told God, if this last person turns me away, I will stop trying. Then you opened your gate." I felt tears stain my eyes. I could almost see the boy he had been, thin, dusty, yet determined not to break. "You know," he continued, "that night after you gave me the money, I didn't sleep. I went to the mango tree near our house and prayed. I said, Oloron, ije iki ayami ribep me. God, let my mother live to see my breakthrough." He was silent for a moment, watching the waves. She didn't live to see it. She died just before my final exams. But I wrote WAEC with tears in my eyes. I told myself, if I fail, I will have failed her memory. He passed with distinction, the best in his school. The state government noticed his result and awarded him a scholarship to study engineering. But it wasn't just the scholarship, he said. It was the fact that someone, a stranger, believed in me enough to sacrifice her last savings. It made me fight like a man who had been given a second life. He worked through university, tutoring students to earn extra money. When his shoes tore, he patched them. When hunger came, he endured. Because I thought, he said, smiling faintly, if I give up, that woman's sacrifice will be in vain. He spoke of nights spent under kerosene lamps, of walking long distances because he couldn't afford transport, of going without new clothes for years. But every time I wanted to quit, I saw your face in my mind. I saw that evening at your gate. The retreat ended with a gala dinner, but I could not stop thinking about his words. I realized that what I had given that day was not just money. It was hope. A lifeline. And that lifeline had pulled him into a future where he could now pull others along. In the following weeks, we began working together on a plan. He wanted to create a program that would support other boys and girls like him, children with dreams but no means. We will call it Auntie Teachers Fund, he said, because you were my first investor. We started with 5 students, paying their WAEC fees quietly, visiting their schools to encourage them. I spoke to the girls especially, telling them not to give up even when life seemed impossible. Many cried. Some knelt to thank us. One boy said, "Ma, I will make you proud." I promise. Every time I saw their faces, I remembered the dusty boy at my gate. And every time we sent another payment, I felt my own soul healing from the wounds of the past, the layoff, the hunger, the loneliness. It was as if God was saying, "You see, I never forgot you." Soon, the program expanded. More donors joined, inspired by his story. The company made it an official corporate social responsibility project. We began hosting workshops on study skills, mentoring sessions, and career talks. The first time I saw one of our scholarship students score distinctions in all subjects, I wept. Olorandora. God is good. That of my life became more than survival. It became service. And every new life we touched reminded me that no act of kindness is ever wasted, it always circles back, multiplying itself like ripples on a quiet sea. Destiny's reward, Idanemo. The story of his rise to greatness is not a tale to be told quickly, it is a river with many bends, some calm and some violent. After I heard his story under that tree during the retreat, I realized that the WAEC fee was not just a ticket to write an exam, it was a lifeline that shaped every step that came after. He had passed WAEC with distinction, all A's and a single B in Yoruba language. That result became his passport out of the darkness of his teenage years. The state government had a special program then, the Oyo State Bright Minds Scholarship. He was chosen because his results stood out even among students from private schools. But the scholarship was not a magic wand. It covered tuition, but he still needed to survive, to eat, to buy books, to pay for photocopies of lecture notes. He told me how he became a campus entrepreneur. He would wake up at dawn, wash clothes for other students for a small fee, and then rush to his 8 a.m. class. He sold recharge cards, did graphics design with an old laptop someone donated, and even took part-time teaching jobs at secondary schools near the university. Emo pe mi esi in emo, he said. I knew that life would not push me backward again. There were nights when he almost gave up. When the lights went out and mosquitoes hummed over his head, he would lie on his small hostel bed and pray. Baba mi elok, jeki nj imuloluf ayami. My Father in heaven, let me be the fulfillment of my mother's prayers. In his final year, tragedy struck again, his younger sister fell ill, and there was no money for her treatment. He worked night and day, skipped meals to save money, and eventually paid for her surgery. She survived, and he said that was the first time he truly believed he was born to protect others. When he graduated with first-class honors, he was given the honor of valedictorian. The vice-chancellor shook his hand and said, "Young man, your story is what this nation needs." He received a postgraduate scholarship to study abroad, a country he had only seen on television. Life abroad was a different battlefield. Cold winters that beat through his skin, accents that made him feel like an outsider, and endless coursework that kept him awake night after night. But he was relentless. He became president of the African Students Association, tutored struggling classmates, and volunteered at youth centers. He said he was determined to be excellent not just for himself but for everyone who had ever believed in him. He returned to Nigeria not just with a degree, but with a vision to create systems that would give others what he was given, a chance. When he applied to the multinational company, he was one of the youngest candidates in the history of the firm to be considered for management. His performance in the assessment was so strong that he skipped 2 job levels and was placed directly into a leadership pipeline program. From there, promotions came fast, not because he was lucky, but because he worked harder than everyone else, carrying the memory of hunger, dusty streets, and a torn exercise book as fuel. "Imi ejokodi nin to me low," he said. "It is the spirit of struggle that keeps me moving." By the time he became regional director, he was known not just for his brilliance but for his heart. He mentored junior staff, funded other student exams quietly, and volunteered for corporate social responsibility projects no one wanted to take. The day he walked into that interview room and saw me, he said it felt like God had come full circle to honor every tear he and his mother had cried. 7 is not just about his destiny's reward, it is about the reward for every act of faith sown in silence. It is proof that kindness is never wasted, that prayers spoken in the darkness bloom in the light. "Biebo aki eri oni with graven y with graven emo," I whispered as he finished his story. "If we play and reap joy, we worry no more." And I knew, as I looked at him that day, that the boy at my gate had not just come back, he had come carrying a harvest big enough for both of us. The return home, Irene Corindo. When he finally received the letter naming him regional director, he sat quietly in his office for almost an hour. He did not call anyone, did not post on social media, he just stared out of the window at the Lagos skyline. In his heart, one thought burned: I must go home. He had been away from Ibadan for years, living in the rush of Lagos, then in foreign lands. But Ibadan was the soil where his story began. He requested time off from work, and one Friday morning, he set out early in his SUV, driving himself along the expressway. The road stretched wide, flanked by endless farmlands. When he saw the first signpost welcoming him to Ibadan, a lump formed in his throat. He drove straight to Beer, where his mother used to sell vegetables. The market women recognized him slowly, some gasping when they realized who he had become. "In Omo Mama Ayabo and I," one of them asked. "Are you Mama Ayabo's son?" He nodded, and they broke into smiles and exclamations. "Oh! Oloren O, I.E. Poda. We thought poverty would swallow you. Look at you now." He walked through the market, remembering the days he carried firewood, fetched water, or begged for food. The air was thick with the smell of roasted corn, fried akra, and earth after rain. He bought yam, plantain, and oil for some of the women who were struggling, insisting they take them as a gift. Then he drove to the school, the very place where I had once taught. The gates were rusted, the paint on the buildings peeling, but the sound of children's laughter still floated through the compound. He parked and walked in, his suit jacket slung over one shoulder. The security guard looked at him suspiciously until he explained why he was there. In the staff room, he found 2 teachers who had been there since his time as a student. One recognized him immediately and exclaimed, "Oh Mummy, you are back." They asked him questions, teased him about how thin he used to be, and thanked him for remembering the school. He asked about me, the teacher who had once opened her gate to him. She is no longer here, one of the teachers said softly. They laid her off years ago. Last we heard, she moved to Lagos. His heart sank. Lagos was a big city, how would he find me? But he told them, I will look for her. My story is not complete until I thank her. He visited the classroom where he had once sat. The wooden desks were scratched with names and doodles, but he touched them like they were sacred altars. In that moment, he felt his mother's presence. He knelt at the corner of the classroom and whispered, Ayami, Motideli. Motideni Mofedi. My mother, I have returned home. I have become who I dreamed to be. Before leaving Ibadan, he went to the grave where his mother was buried. The weeds had overgrown her grave, so he cleared them himself, poured water on the earth, and placed fresh flowers there. Tears rolled down his face as he said, Ayami. I am standing here today because of your prayers. You did not live to see this day, but I know you are watching. On his way back to Lagos, he was quiet, the weight of memory sitting in his chest. He told himself that he would not rest until he found me, the woman who had made the bridge he walked on. When he got back to Lagos, he used every connection he had, government databases, alumni networks, even social media, searching for any trace of me. Weeks passed before one of his HR officers brought him a lead, a woman's CV submitted for a job in their company. The name was mine. He said his hands trembled as he opened the file. So this is how God works, he whispered. He instructed the HR department to shortlist me for an interview immediately, but he did not want to influence the process beyond that. He wanted me to come on my own merit, to see for himself the woman who had given without knowing what her gift would grow into. The night before the interview, he could not sleep. He kept thinking, what if she does not remember me? What if she regrets helping me? He prayed, not for himself this time, but for me. Oliwa, Jo, Jeiki Ojo Rido. Ma Jeiki Ifeti Ofa Yunyendi Esen. Lord, please let her day be good. Do not let the love she once showed go to waste. It is the pilgrimage of a man who refused to forget his roots, who understood that no matter how tall the tree grows, its strength comes from the soil it sprang from. His return to Ibadan was not just to see the past, it was to gather strength for the future moment when destiny would bring us face to face again. Restoration or Ipoda Ariti. Getting the job was just the beginning. The first few months were overwhelming. The office building was a maze of glass and polished floors, and I often felt like a small fish in an ocean. But he was always there, guiding me without making it look like favoritism. Auntie, he said, I put you here because you deserve to be here. The rest, you will earn. My first salary was more than I had ever earned in a year as a teacher. I paid off my debts, sent money to my younger cousins, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a return to my lungs. The burden I had carried since losing my mother slowly lifted. One Saturday morning, I sat in my small rented apartment and said to myself, this cannot just be about me. I used part of my savings and bought a small piece of land back in Ibadan. I hired a contractor and began building a 2-room bungalow, not for myself, but for the young girls I had seen roaming the streets when they should have been in school. The project became my passion. Every month I traveled to Ibadan, supervised the construction, and watched the house grow from foundation to completion. When it was done, I turned it into a safe home for girls whose parents could not afford education. We furnished it with beds, desks, and solar lanterns for studying at night. When I told him about it, he smiled widely. Auntie teacher, he said, you have turned your testimony into a bridge for others. He personally funded scholarships for every girl in the house and promised to visit them. December came, and with it, the first outreach we planned together. We called it Mama Ayabo Day in honor of his late mother. The event was held in a large open field near Beer. We hired canopies, chairs, and a sound system. Villagers trooped in, curious to see what was happening. We distributed food, bags of rice, beans, and cartons of noodles, to widows and struggling families. Tailors were hired to sew free uniforms for children. Doctors volunteered to run a health check station. And, of course, WAEC forms were purchased for every final year student who could not afford them. As I stood on stage that day, microphone in hand, I told them my story, how one small act of kindness had come back to bless me years later. I told them about the boy who had stood at my gate, and the man he had become. Many in the crowd wept. Ima idosi ibenuj ilomiai, I said. Do not close your heart to another's pain. When he took the stage, he shared his side of the story. His voice broke as he said, I would not be standing here today if one woman had not believed in me. So if you are here today and you think your life is over, hear this, it is not. Help will find you. The crowd erupted in applause. That night, under the stars, we sat together exhausted but fulfilled. He turned to me and said, this is just the beginning. Next year, we will do more. Back in Lagos, I settled fully into my new life. I moved into a modest but beautiful apartment, decorated the sitting room with framed pictures of my late mother, and for the first time in years, I felt like she would be proud if she saw me. I became more involved in the company's corporate social responsibility department. My suggestions on youth programs were adopted and funded. I found myself speaking at conferences, mentoring interns, and visiting rural schools as a representative of the company. There were challenges, jealousy from some colleagues, difficult projects, long hours, but every time I felt tired, I remembered the girls in my Ibadan house, their bright eyes and eager hands holding exercise books, and I pressed on. The most touching moment came months later, when one of the girls in the house passed her WAEC with flying colors. She called me crying with joy. Auntie, I want to be a teacher like you, she said. My heart swelled with pride. 9 is the rebuilding, not just walls of brick and mortar, but walls of hope, dignity, and purpose. It is where the seed of kindness begins to bear fruit, not just for one boy, but for a whole community. Agbodo can kill ledo agbodo, I said to myself as I watched the girls playing one evening. A single corn cannot make a barn. But many corns together can feed a generation. And that was exactly what we were beginning to do. The lesson, IT Siwaju. Lagos glittered outside the boardroom window, its skyline full of ambition, its streets below teeming with millions chasing survival. I often sat in that room after meetings, letting the silence settle on me like a warm shore. I had once stood on those same streets, dusty and hungry, wondering if God had forgotten me. Now, I was here, not just as staff, but as a board advisor on youth outreach. My voice mattered. My suggestions shaped policies that touched lives in villages I had once walked through barefoot. The company grew its youth empowerment program into a nationwide initiative. Every quarter, we traveled to a new state, from Oyo to Kwara to Osun, funding WAEC fees, distributing learning materials, and offering mentorship to secondary school students. Some of them had never seen a corporate leader before, and their eyes widened with hope when they met him and me. One day, after a long program in Abeokuta, a girl no older than 16 pulled me aside. "Ma, is it true that you once had nothing and someone helped you?" she asked timidly. I smiled and nodded. "Yes, my dear. I had nothing, just like you. But one person believed in me." She straightened her shoulders and said, "Then I will believe in myself too." Her words stayed with me. That night, I lay in my hotel bed and thought of my late mother. She had prayed every night for my breakthrough. I felt her prayers finally fulfilled, not just in my job or salary, but in the fact that I had become a vessel for others. Be a boy dada, a mori dada. When we do good, we will meet good. Those words became the motto of our outreach program. At the second Mama Ayabo Day, the crowd had doubled. Parents brought their children from distant villages. Some came with babies on their backs, some with walking sticks. They said they had heard that this was the place where dreams were rekindled. This time, we added a scholarship award ceremony, celebrating students who had excelled in their exams the previous year. As I stood on the stage, I looked at the sea of faces, hundreds of children, mothers, fathers, widows, and elders. My voice caught as I told them, kindness is a seed. You may plant it today and forget, but God will water it. One day, it will grow into a forest big enough to shelter you. When I stepped down, the women of the community surrounded me, blessing me with words, pouring prayers like water over my head. Imosai boelo, ki oloron mosai boelo. Keep going, may God go with you. The boy who had once stood at my gate was now a man who called me almost every week to ask, Auntie teacher, what next can we do? Sometimes we laughed about that first meeting. If you had closed your gate that day, he said once, I don't know where I would be today. I always reminded him, it was God who sent you to my gate. I was only the messenger. One quiet evening, after a successful year-end report, I stood on the balcony of my new house in Ibadan, the one near the girls' home. The sun was setting, painting the sky in orange and purple. The sound of girls laughing drifted from the compound next door. My heart swelled with gratitude. I remembered everything, the day I lost my job, the bus ride to Lagos, the nights I cried on the thin mattress, the interview day when my knees nearly gave way, the moment he said, this job is yours. Every tear had been gathered. Every prayer had been answered. Oloran Oson. God never sleeps. I realized that what I had been given was not just a second chance at life, it was a calling. A calling to stand in the gap for others, to keep my gate open for those who might come knocking. So I made a vow that night, under the Ibadan sunset, as long as I have breath, no child will stand at my gate and go away hopeless. The lesson of my life is simple but eternal: when destiny knocks, open the gate. The person you help today may be the bridge to your tomorrow. Anfoni Reki Ipe Titi Laisan. A good deed never goes unrewarded. And with that, I whispered a prayer for the next child, the next dreamer, the next story waiting to be written, because my story was proof that miracles often wear dusty slippers and hold torn exercise books. The boy at my gate had become the man at my table. And together, we were building a future where no child would ever feel the despair we once knew.